The House of Whisperers, the Flight and the Cross. Around noon the light faltered. Day folded upon itself as if ashamed to watch. Shadows pooled in places where no object cast them. The temple's veil tore like cloth in a beast's mouth, but James did not see that. He saw only the cross and the one upon it, and felt the old life rising around a new centre. The last cry split the air like a storm unroofing a house. Then silence, as if the world had been a drum beaten too long and the drummer's hand had finally fallen away. Somewhere to James's left, a soldier's voice broke through, raw and unguarded. Truly, this was the Son of God. The words flared across James's chest and found their mark. Faith and fear gathered there and would not separate. When it was over, the crowd thinned like fog. Some went back to duties, some to prayer, some to wine. James remained until the hill emptied of everything but wind and the scrape of tools where they lowered the body. He could not stop shivering. As dusk reached a hand over the city, Joseph of Arimathea carried the limp weight of the teacher into the arms of a tomb still new to death. James walked until the sky above had one star, stubborn and cold. In the narrow streets he found the door he had learned by heart, the upper room, and scraped his knuckles twice against the wood. When the latch lifted, he entered into a darkness much like the gardens. Except here the olives were men with sunken eyes, and their leaves were hands wrung raw with waiting. He said no word. None asked him. They were all keeping watch now, wide awake, because sleep had deserted them. Somewhere a woman sobbed, the slow sob of one who has emptied herself of sound and found more. Peter, among them after his denial, wept inconsolably. James sat against the wall, wrapped his arms around his knees, and believed, as much as he could bear, that the world had ended, and that somehow, by that ending, something new had begun. The room smelled of sweat and lamp smoke. Its walls pressed close, as though they meant to crush him along with the dozen hearts beating with fear. James sat in the corner near the shuttered window, his knees pulled to his chest. He had not spoken much since Golgotha. Words seemed brittle things liable to break before they could be shaped. The others muttered around him, footsteps pacing, voices sharp and low, but James heard only the sound inside his skull. Boom, boom, blap, blap, the thud of hammer on wood, over and over, each strike echoing, each strike his own. He shut his eyes and the memory rose. He had felt foolish then, ashamed, not knowing what to say. Now that shame returned, heavier, poisoned. He wished he had spoken, a word of thanks, a question, anything. Instead he had swallowed silence, as though silence were safety. What place did he hold among the disciples? Peter with his fire, John with his nearness, even Thomas with his stubborn tongue. Each seemed larger, more necessary. But he felt like a shadow at the edge of the circle, a face in the crowd that followed. The teacher had called him, yes, but what had he become? A witness to failure, a vessel of fear. Sometimes he pressed his ear to the shutter, straining for the sound of soldiers' boots. He expected them to come any moment, to break in, drag them into the streets. In his mind he rehearsed what he would say, what he would do, but each version ended the same, with him faltering, trembling, unable to meet death's eyes. Sleep rarely came, and when it did, dreams dragged him back to the hill. He saw the sky darken, felt the ground tremble beneath his feet. He saw the body slump forward, heard the final cry tear the air. And always, always, that soldier's voice, raw, almost broken. Truly, this was the Son of God. A Roman had spoken truth, while James, a disciple, had hidden like a thief in the crowd. He woke from such dreams with his throat tight and his eyes wet, ashamed that tears were all he had to offer. On the third morning, when the door rattled with sudden pounding, his chest seized. The moment had come. Soldiers, shackles, death. He crouched lower, as though shrinking could make him invisible. But it was no soldier. It was Mary, her voice ragged, her words tumbling. "The tomb is empty!" The others surged to their feet, but James remained frozen. Empty? What could that mean? His mind clutched at every possibility. Grave robbers, priests scheming, some cruel jest. Hope was too dangerous to lift. He would not trust it. He could not. And yet Mary's eyes found his. Her hands clutched his arm, trembling with something fierce and alive. "I saw him," she whispered, as though afraid the air itself might steal the secret. "He spoke my name." James's heart buckled under the weight of it. Could it be true? Could the one he had abandoned, the one he had failed to defend, truly live? If so, what mercy was this, that such a Lord would return for those who had scattered like frightened children, as the others argued, some daring to believe, others clinging to fear. James withdrew again to his corner. His lips moved without sound, over and over. "Remember me, Lord, though I am small. Remember me, though I fled." And then, without warning, the air itself shifted. The lamps bent their flames. A presence stood where no door had opened. James raised his eyes, and there he was, the teacher, alive, wounded yet radiant. Fear rolled from him like a tide. James's body trembled, his chest racked with sobs, and he fell forward onto his knees. He pressed his forehead to the floor. In that moment, he knew the truth. Even the overlooked were important in his sight. 4 days after the crucifixion, Jerusalem pretended to be normal, but it was a fragile disguise. Merchants cried out their wares in the marketplace, women carried jars to the well, children chased goats down the alleys. Yet beneath the clatter of carts and the chant of priests, whispers threaded like smoke. Men leaned close over bread, muttering of the sky gone black at noon. Old women clutched at their shawls and whispered prayers beneath their breath. James walked among them with his cloak drawn tight. He saw the faces, heard their hushed words, felt the fear disguised as routine. No one spoke Christ's name aloud, but the memory of Golgotha hung over the city like a storm cloud that refused to break. For James, every errand carried danger. A walk to the well, a step into the market, each was a risk of recognition, of a neighbour's whisper leading to an officer's fist. He kept his eyes lowered, his mouth closed, his prayers folded into silence. Yet everywhere he went, the earth itself seemed to carry the rumour. The world shifted that day. Nothing is as it was. The gatherings were smaller now and hidden deeper. A knock, twice, then once again, on a plain wooden door. A pause, a question, faces bent together in small, darkened rooms. They spoke of Emmaus, of Thomas's wound-born faith, of the teacher appearing and vanishing like breath on glass. Each story was guarded, trembling, as though the walls themselves might betray them if they were too bold. James said little. He carried more than he spoke. Yet when he prayed alone, kneeling on cold stone with his forehead pressed to his hands, the words rushed like water. "You live. You know me. Do not cast me aside, though I am nothing." One evening, after such a gathering, a widow touched his arm as the others slipped into the street. Her eyes were hollowed by grief, her voice no louder than a sigh. "You were there," she said, "at the cross." Fear struck him first, then shame. He nodded, unable to speak. She leaned close, whisper trembling. "Tell me, when the darkness fell, was it the end? Was he afraid?" The memory tore through him. Sky torn open, earth trembling like a living thing, the teacher's eyes steady even as nails pinned him fast. James found his voice, rough and low. No, he was not afraid. The widow wept softly, and James with her. Neither dared to lift their voices above a whisper, but in that hush faith grew. This was his part, not Peter's bold speech, nor John's open wonder. His was the hidden work, slipping into the cracks of the city, holding trembling hands, keeping alive the memory of the one they had seen. A faith carried in whispers, a lamp cupped against the wind. And through it all, one truth held him steady. The risen Lord had seen him, James, small and fearful, and had not cast him away. The city breathed uneasily. Rome's patrols thickened in the streets, sandals striking stone with a rhythm meant to remind all who listened that power did not sleep. Whispers moved like fever through the markets, followers hunted, houses searched, names spoken and then erased. Some of the brethren vanished, not to return. Others drifted away on pilgrim roads, preferring exile to chains. James stayed. He moved like a shadow, slipping through alleys and waiting for soldiers to pass, so he would not be searched. Even so, every knock at a door made his stomach clench. Every voice raised in anger outside brought his hand to the latch. Within the gatherings trust was fragile. Faces darted toward shutters, words broke off mid-sentence, and silence often said more than speech. He felt the weight of his house like a second skin. Its darkness pressed upon him, yet it was safer than the streets. He knelt often near the doorframe, forehead against the beam, praying without words. He remembered the teacher's breath when he had stood among them, "Peace be with you." And he tried to carry that peace into rooms that trembled with mistrust. And still he asked, why me? He was no preacher, no leader. If he spoke, his voice faltered. If he tried to guide, his hands shook. What part had he except to survive, to remember? Yet something in him whispered that memory itself was a calling, that keeping the flame alive in secret places was as holy as thunder in the temple courts. These thoughts were on his mind the most faithful of nights when he heard an unfamiliar knock. Not the pattern he knew, not the careful rhythm of friend or brother, just a single, firm rap. James's breath caught. His hand hovered at the latch, cold with sweat. A soldier? A trap? The house seemed to hold its breath with him. "James, son of Alphaeus!" The words pierced him like a blade. He froze, heart hammering. He could almost feel the hill rising before his eyes, the darkness at noon, the earth trembling. Who would speak so? Who would dare? His fingers tightened on the wood. He whispered, almost to himself, "Lord, what have you done?" Epilogue, desertion and loss. The basin still sat in the corner, its water now cloudy with dust. James's hands trembled as he carried it back to the wall. His heart beat like a drum in his throat. He had poured the water, spoken the holy words, and watched a centurion bow like a child. Even as he had done it, a voice inside him had whispered, "This is folly, this is ruin, this is the edge of the sword." Yet the stronger voice, quieter, deeper, had told him simply, "Obey." Longinus had risen from the baptism like a man stripped bare. He had not shouted, nor wept, nor sworn allegiance in grand words. Only the stillness in his shoulders told the truth. A weight, long carried, had fallen away. He had left the house that night with no shield, no spear, no armor. James watched him vanish into the alley's darkness, and for a long time after the door shut, he sat unmoving, his palms damp with the water that had splashed as he poured it. The days that followed carried rumor like wind through grass. Soldiers muttered of a missing officer. Deserters spoke his name with fear. Even among the faithful, whispers of Longinus spread fast. To baptize such a man was dangerous, an offense both to Rome and to the priests. James told no one, but he prayed with a heart heavy as stone. "Lord, you have done this. Keep him. Keep me." Meanwhile, Longinus walked roads he had never travelled before, though he had marched 100 campaigns. Each step carried both freedom and danger. He shed the armour of Rome, and with it the name Rome had branded into him. Every village he passed looked on him with suspicion, a soldier without sword, a man whose eyes seemed too clear for a mercenary and too weary for a pilgrim. Yet he walked, not seeking shelter, but carrying within himself a strange certainty. He had been washed, and the water had cut deeper than any blade. But Rome does not easily lose what it claims. By the time he reached Cappadocia, rumour had run ahead. At inns, men whispered of a centurion who had forsaken Caesar for a crucified Jew. At markets, children laughed and repeated the tale. He left his spear to follow a ghost. His name clung to him like smoke, reaching his vineyard before he did. Damaris heard first, and she did not hesitate. In the dark of night, she took Marcus by the hand. The boy protested, clutching the toy sword his father had carved him, but her silence silenced him more than any rebuke. She packed bread, water, a few coins, and fled into the hills. She had lived too long in Rome's shadow not to know the cost. A deserter's wife was a widow in waiting, and a deserter's son soon learned shame sharper than hunger. Better to vanish than to watch him die on the road where crosses waited. When Longinus came at last, weary and footsore, the vineyard lay silent. The dog barked once, then slunk back into its corner. He stepped into the house and found only absence, a loom abandoned mid-weave, a half-spun basket, the toy sword lying on the floor where Marcus had dropped it in haste. He stood in the doorway for a long time, the emptiness pressing heavier than chains. He had killed men and buried comrades, had seen cities burned and temples looted, but never had silence wounded him so deeply. At last, he lifted the toy sword and turned it once in his hand. The wood bore the grooves of childish battle, scars made not by war, but by play. His vision blurred, though he did not weep. Slowly he laid it on the table, as carefully as if it were iron to be sharpened. "They're gone," he said into the silence. His voice was steady, though his chest ached as though pierced anew. "And I cannot follow." He stepped back outside. The vineyard waited, rows unharvested, but he knew that work was no longer for his hands. Longinus lifted his face into the fading light. Death would come for him, whether by Rome's hand, or betrayal, or a wandering sword. But he was not afraid. He had already died once. What remained was to live until the blade fell, and to speak what he had seen. He walked down the road, carrying nothing but the memory of water running over his brow and the eyes of the one who had called his name. Rome saw him as a deserter, but heaven saw him as a son. The end